It began with the dull clang of metal striking something hard beneath the soil. A farmer somewhere in the rolling hills of the American Midwest thought he had found another stone, until the earth around it began to crumble, revealing a curve, a hollow, and then the unmistakable arc of bone. But this wasn't ordinary. It was massive, the size of his entire arm. The man froze, the shovel trembling in his hands. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. He didn't yet know that he had stumbled upon a mystery that science would soon choose to forget. Stories like his surface again and again, in forgotten newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and whispered accounts that never made it past local headlines. From the deserts of Nevada to the green hills of Ireland, from the sands of the Middle East to the valleys of Peru, the same impossible discoveries appear. Skeletal remains far too large to fit within the framework of modern anthropology. Some claim they were the bones of ancient giants, a race erased from human history. Others insisted they were hoaxes. Yet each report ends the same way: confiscated, dismissed, and buried again under the weight of official explanation. How many of these stories were true? And if even one was, why were they erased so completely from textbooks and museums? The deeper one digs, the clearer it becomes that the earth keeps more secrets than it reveals. Every shovelful of dirt hides centuries of forgotten narratives, some too uncomfortable for modern science to face. We are taught that humanity's story is linear, a slow, steady climb from primitive ancestors to the civilization we know today. But what if that story is missing an entire chapter? What if buried beneath fields and deserts lies evidence of beings who towered above us? Beings remembered in myth, worshipped as gods, and quietly erased by time. The farmer's discovery should have rewritten history. Instead, it vanished into silence. And like countless others before him, he was told to forget what he'd seen. But the earth does not lie. Beneath every field, every forgotten mound, there may still rest the bones that shouldn't exist, waiting for someone brave enough to dig again. For more than a century, the official stance has remained unchanged. Giants never existed. Ask any archaeologist or historian and you'll hear the same refrain. The giant skeletons of old newspaper headlines were nothing more than misidentified bones, exaggerated stories, or deliberate hoaxes. It's a neat conclusion, one that ties the mystery up in a bow and files it away under myth. But beneath that polished certainty lies a strange contradiction that refuses to die. Between the late 1800s and early 1900s, hundreds of reports appeared in respected newspapers across America. The New York Times, Scientific American, and countless local gazettes. They spoke of skeletons unearthed from burial mounds in Wisconsin, Tennessee, and the Ohio Valley, some measuring 8 to 12 feet tall. Photographs existed. Measurements were taken. Even Smithsonian agents were often listed as witnesses. And yet, nearly every artifact, every bone, every scrap of evidence has since disappeared. The official explanation is silence. No records, no remains, no accountability. But the question lingers like a ghost. If these discoveries were proven hoaxes, why were they taken, catalogued, and locked away rather than exposed and dismissed publicly? Why were so many reports abruptly withdrawn? And why do Smithsonian archives contain references to large human skeletons with missing accession numbers? Science prides itself on skepticism, yet skepticism turns dangerous when it becomes selective. Perhaps it isn't the evidence that's missing, but the will to confront what that evidence implies. Because if even one of those giant skeletons was genuine, it wouldn't just challenge anthropology. It would shatter the very foundation of what we believe about human origins. And so, the bones remain hidden, not beneath the ground, but beneath the weight of silence. Long before the word giant was ever whispered in archaeological circles, it thundered through the oldest stories humanity ever told. In the book of Genesis, they were called the Nephilim, the fallen ones, born of divine beings and human women. There were giants in the earth in those days, the verse reads almost casually, as if describing a forgotten fact rather than a myth. The Hebrews called them Anakim, fearsome figures whose height terrified even seasoned warriors. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, sky-born gods who descended to rule mankind. In Babylon, they were the Apkallu, half-divine sages said to have rebuilt civilization after a great flood. Different names, different continents, yet the same archetype looms over them all. Beings of great stature, wisdom, and mystery who walked the earth before the dawn of our recorded history. Were these stories merely symbolic, ancient metaphors for power and pride? Or were they remnants of a collective memory, echoes of a civilization erased by catastrophe and rewritten as myth? Archaeology gives no official answer, but the stones and texts seem to whisper otherwise. Across Mesopotamia, colossal statues depict rulers with proportions beyond the human norm. In Egypt, hieroglyphs reference the great ones who came before the first pharaohs. And in South America, the oldest temples seem built for people much larger than those who later inhabited them. If myths are mirrors of memory, then perhaps these tales are not invention but preservation. A record, veiled in symbolism, of a world lost beneath mud and water. A world of mighty men of old, whose bones now lie scattered and unclaimed. So the question emerges, when ancient scribes wrote of beings that towered over men, were they chronicling legends or witnessing survivors of a forgotten epoch? And if they were real, what happened to them and who decided their story would be called myth? At the turn of the 20th century, archaeology was still a frontier, an age of dusty hats, handwritten journals, and discoveries that seemed to rewrite the world with every shovel's strike. In those early days, the reports came often, and they came boldly. Catalina Island, off the coast of California, an archaeologist named Ralph Glidden unearthed hundreds of skeletons from ancient burial sites. Among them, he documented remains far taller than average, with skulls elongated and jaws massive enough to fit over his own. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, and yet the most extraordinary findings, the so-called giants, vanished soon after Glidden's collection was absorbed into museum hands. In Nevada's Lovelock Cave, miners stumbled upon something even stranger. Red-haired mummies wrapped in woven reed mats, entombed in a cavern thick with guano and mystery. The local Paiute tribe had long spoken of a race of towering savage beings, the Site Ka, who were said to have warred against their ancestors before being trapped and burned inside that very cave. For decades, fragments of enormous bones were displayed, photographed, then quietly removed to research facilities. Today, only the legends remain visible. The Ohio Valley mounds tell a similar story. Burial chambers revealing skulls with double rows of teeth and frames stretching 8 to 10 feet tall. Newspaper clippings detail the digs. Affidavits confirm the finds. But the bones, gone. Each case follows the same eerie rhythm: discovery, documentation, disappearance. What began as adventure turned into omission. Expeditions that should have changed history were reduced to footnotes, their artifacts labeled misidentified or missing. And so, across the continent, a pattern formed like a ghostly fingerprint. Every time the evidence threatened to challenge the accepted timeline of humanity, it was quietly locked away. Somewhere behind museum walls or in unmarked drawers, those relics still rest, proof not of myth, but of a truth the world was never meant to remember. For decades, a shadow has lingered over the grand marble halls of the Smithsonian institution. an institution built to preserve human history, yet accused of erasing parts of it. Beginning in the late 1800s, newspaper articles and local reports tell the same unsettling story. Giant skeletons unearthed, crated, and promptly shipped to the Smithsonian for study. Each time, the discoveries seemed poised to rewrite human evolution. And each time, the trail went cold. In 1891, a burial mound in Crittenden, Kentucky, revealed skeletons over 9 feet tall. The bones, examined by local officials, were sent east for further analysis. No record of them exists today. In 1912, near Lake Delavan, Wisconsin, archaeologists uncovered 18 skeletons, all massive, with elongated skulls and double rows of teeth. The Smithsonian reportedly took possession of the remains, but in the archives, silence. In Pennsylvania, a similar case unfolded. Large skeletons unearthed by farmers were carefully cataloged before being transferred to Washington. They, too, vanished without trace. Eyewitnesses, from local historians to former employees, have claimed that thousands of anomalous remains were collected, then either hidden or destroyed. A 1990s Freedom of Information request produced no results, no records, no acknowledgments. Some researchers allege that internal Smithsonian correspondence even referenced specimens inconsistent with established anthropology. Yet these documents, like the bones themselves, have disappeared into the void. The pattern is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Discoveries that confirm expectations are displayed in glass cases. Those that threaten the narrative vanish into obscurity. The Smithsonian's silence has become its loudest statement, a quiet insistence that some truths are too disruptive to see daylight. As one whistleblower reportedly said, "Science no longer protects discovery, it protects the story." And so the public is left with fragments, yellowed clippings, vanished crates, and a haunting question. Did the world's most trusted institution bury history to preserve belief? Whispers from inside the very institution sworn to safeguard truth have become the most chilling evidence of all. Former employees' anonymous letters and leaked memos suggest that behind the Smithsonian's polished image lies a quiet machinery of control, one that decides what version of history the world is allowed to see. These are not claims from fringe corners of the internet, but from individuals who once held keys to the vaults themselves. One former museum archivist, speaking under a pseudonym, claimed that entire collections of oversized skeletal remains were ordered destroyed in the mid-20th century under new classification guidelines. "It wasn't science," he said, "it was containment." Another whistleblower described crates labeled with anomalous anthropological specimens being transferred to undisclosed facilities, their catalog numbers later erased from inventory. The official reason? Reclassification or clerical error. Yet when independent researchers cross-checked those same numbers decades later, they found black holes in the records, entries that simply ceased to exist. Private investigators and historians have tried to pry open the archives, filing Freedom of Information requests, tracing shipment logs, even contacting retired curators. In response, they received polite denials, vague explanations, or outright contradictions. One press release from the Smithsonian in 1999 flatly stated that no such remains were ever held. But a digitized field report from 1912 uncovered, years later, clearly referenced large skeletal material sent from Wisconsin to the institution for analysis. How could both be true? The deeper researchers dig, the louder the silence becomes. It's as if history itself has been redacted, lines blacked out, pages missing, stories rewritten. Whether through bureaucratic oversight or deliberate erasure, the result is the same: a wall between the public and a past that doesn't fit the narrative. And behind that wall, In the echo of locked rooms and unmarked crates, the truth still breathes, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. There was a time when science was the language of curiosity, when explorers dared to follow the evidence wherever it led. But somewhere along the way, curiosity was replaced by control. Today, the halls of academia resemble not open forums of discovery but temples of belief, and their high priests wear lab coats instead of robes. They decide what can be studied, what can be questioned, and what must be quietly dismissed as heresy. The idea of giant humans doesn't merely challenge physical anthropology, it threatens the entire structure built upon it. If bones of men standing 10 feet tall were proven real, the Darwinian ladder of evolution would splinter. The story of human progress, from ape to man to modern genius, would need rewriting. Entire academic careers, textbooks, and funding systems depend on that ladder staying intact. And so, evidence that doesn't fit the timeline is not studied. It's buried. This is not science in the spirit of discovery, it is dogma in the disguise of reason. Universities, journals, and museums form an unspoken alliance, a gatekeeping network that determines which discoveries are acceptable and which are condemned to oblivion. Dissenting voices are mocked, stripped of credibility, and cast out as pseudo-scientists. Yet history reminds us that nearly every revolution in knowledge began with ridicule, from Galileo's telescope to Darwin's own theory. The paradox is painful. Those who once fought dogma have become its heirs. The skeptic's creed has hardened into faith in their own infallibility. And while they preach objectivity, they practice censorship. Because if giants once walked among us, then humanity's origins may not be as random, as accidental, or as meaningless as they insist. Perhaps that's the real fear. Not the bones themselves, but what they represent. A truth that dares to make us small again in a universe far older and far stranger than science is willing to admit. The modern Inquisition doesn't burn books, it laughs at them. In an age of instant information, ridicule has become the most efficient form of censorship. The moment a story about giant skeletons surfaces online, the machinery of mockery whirs to life. Late-night hosts make jokes, fact-checkers publish smug debunks, and polished documentaries slip the term pseudoscience into every third sentence. The result is the same as any ban or blacklist. The subject becomes untouchable, not because it's disproven, but because it's disrespected. Take the 2014 giant skeleton hoax headline that went viral across dozens of major outlets. Articles claimed a Photoshop contest had fooled millions, conveniently ignoring that legitimate 19th century excavation reports existed long before digital trickery. Or the television specials that begin with intrigue, only to pivot halfway through with phrases like, "Experts agree the photos were fake." The story ends in laughter, the viewers move on, and the evidence, real or imagined, fades into obscurity. This pattern is no accident. It's cultural conditioning, a line drawn between the credible and the crazy. It keeps audiences within safe intellectual boundaries and keeps institutions beyond reproach. To question is to invite ridicule. To laugh along is to belong. And so, curiosity, that spark that once ignited discovery, is quietly smothered under the weight of social approval. But one question lingers in the silence that follows every joke. Who benefits when curiosity is silenced? Certainly not the truth, which demands discomfort to grow. Not the public, which deserves the right to wonder. No, the only beneficiaries are those who fear what might surface if people begin to look too closely. Mockery is the new censorship, polished, viral, and invisible. And behind every punchline about giant bones, there's a whisper that refuses to die. They laugh because they're afraid of what might not be funny at all. Long before Columbus crossed the ocean or settlers staked their claims, vast civilizations thrived across North America, the mysterious mound builders. From the forests of the Ohio Valley to the plains of the Mississippi, they raised thousands of massive earthen monuments, some aligned with celestial precision. Yet who they truly were remains a question archaeology still struggles to answer. Local tribes spoke of them with reverence and fear. The legends tell of a race of towering red-haired beings who ruled the land before being driven out by the ancestors of today's native nations. The Paiute, the Choctaw, and the Lenape each preserved stories of great men, not metaphorical but literal giants, with strength beyond comprehension and appetites that bordered on monstrous. They were not gods, yet not quite human either. When the earthworks were first excavated in the 1800s, early archaeologists reported oversized bones buried within the mounds, often in ceremonial positions, sometimes accompanied by copper ornaments and stone tools too large for ordinary hands. To the tribes, these findings confirmed what their elders had whispered for generations. The giants were real, and their defeat was a turning point in human history. To academia, the stories were dismissed as myth, the bones misidentified, the artifacts misinterpreted. Yet curiously, many of those relics, catalogued and shipped east, vanished soon after. It's as if the mounds themselves were less burial sites and more tombs of memory, sealing away a forgotten epoch beneath layers of soil and silence. Every time a new mound was opened, the same question resurfaced. Who were these builders and what power did they once hold? If the earth could speak, it might tell us that giants once walked here, and that those who defeated them buried not just their bones, but their story. In the fertile valleys of Ohio and Mississippi, the ground seems to breathe with untold secrets. During the late 19th century, as railroads carved through ancient lands, workers uncovered burial chambers unlike anything seen before. Massive skeletons, some measuring 8, 9, even 10 feet tall, were found laid to rest with care, surrounded by strange artifacts of copper, slate, and mica. Newspapers from Chillicothe, Miamisburg, and St. Louis recorded the finds in vivid detail. Farmers took photographs. Local historical societies logged affidavits. And then, silence. Within months, federal agents and museum representatives arrived. The sites were fenced off, the remains boxed up, the artifacts cataloged and shipped away for study. No public reports ever surfaced. Some burial mounds were destroyed entirely, leveled to make room for farmland or highways. Others were declared protected sites, closed to all but authorized researchers. Yet those researchers never returned, and the mounds remained sealed as if the earth itself had been placed under a gag order. Eyewitnesses spoke of femurs as long as a man's arm, skulls that could fit over a human head like a helmet. Some claimed the bones turned to dust upon exposure to air, a convenient explanation for their disappearance. Others whispered that they had been deliberately destroyed to erase a contradiction too large to explain. The pattern was unmistakable. Discovery followed by disappearance, curiosity followed by control. Each excavation that promised revelation ended in quiet suppression. And so, the valleys fell silent again, their stories buried deeper with every passing year. Today, when tourists visit these rolling hills and perfect mounds, they see nothing but ancient geometry and green grass. But beneath their feet lies something older and far more inconvenient than history books are willing to admit. The giants may be gone, but their shadows still shape the land they once called home. Across the oceans, the same mystery repeats, like a hidden pattern stitched into the fabric of human history. On the island of Sardinia, shepherds once stumbled upon crypts filled with skeletons far larger than ordinary men. The bones were so immense that locals called the sites Tombe dei Giganti, the tombs of the giants. Archaeologists examined them briefly. Photographs were taken, then the remains were swiftly removed for further analysis. None were ever seen again. Official records insist the bones were normal. Yet even today, villagers whisper of sealed chambers beneath the hills, guarded by silence and bureaucracy. Thousands of miles away in the deserts of Peru, ancient skulls tell a similar tale. The Paracas Peninsula yielded elongated crania, some nearly twice the normal human volume. Scientists labeled them the result of head binding, but DNA tests hinted otherwise. Non-human maternal lineages unknown to modern genetics. When those findings surfaced online, the original samples could not be located for independent verification. In the Middle East, the ruins of Bashan, the biblical land of giants, hold megalithic tombs constructed with stones so massive they defy explanation. Local legends speak of the Rephaim, a race of towering beings who lived before the flood. Archaeologists who visited the area in the early 20th century recorded skeletal fragments of unusual size. Those fragments, too, have vanished into museum basements or private collections. Different continents, different centuries. Yet the pattern remains identical: discovery, astonishment, disappearance. Each time, official explanations arrive too quickly, as if rehearsed. Coincidence becomes coordination. Suppression becomes global. It's as though someone somewhere has been quietly erasing an alternate version of human history, one that unites myths from every corner of the earth. The evidence may be scattered, but the echoes are unmistakable. The giants were never a local legend. They were a worldwide reality, remembered by every culture, and erased by the same unseen hand. While the bones have been hidden, traces of their existence may still linger, not in museums, but within us. Modern genetics, despite its sophistication, occasionally stumbles upon anomalies that defy the neat branches of human evolution. Certain isolated populations, from the Basque region of Spain to remote tribes in Patagonia and the Solomon Islands, possess DNA markers for exceptional height, bone density, and cranial volume. Science calls it coincidence. Others suspect inheritance, the echo of something ancient. In 2014, a small genetic study on Peruvian mummies revealed haplogroups not found in any known lineage. The data, quietly retracted months later, suggested an origin inconsistent with established human migration models. Around the same time, unpublished medical research on gigantism genes hinted at an evolutionary root far older than humanity itself. Those findings disappeared behind academic firewalls before the public could see them. Even within modern times, the giant phenomenon surfaces where science least expects it. The Ita people of the Philippines, the Watusi of Central Africa, and the Tehuelche of Argentina all carry myths of ancestors who stood twice as tall as modern men. Early colonial diaries describe encounters with tribes of towering stature that gradually died out or were assimilated. Some geneticists have quietly noted recessive traits that may point to an extinct branch of humanity, one that once walked beside us. But to follow this thread openly risks professional suicide. Any researcher who dares connect myth with biology finds themselves labeled fringe, their funding withdrawn, their data lost. Yet the persistence of these genetic shadows begs the question: are we entirely human as we define it, or descendants of something more? Perhaps the giants never truly vanished. Perhaps they live on, hidden not beneath the earth but within the double helix of every curious soul who still dares to ask where we really came from. Close your eyes and imagine the earth before history began to write itself, a time when mountains were fresh and cities were carved from stone, not steel. In this world, humans were not the dominant race they are now. They shared the land with beings of enormous stature, guardians, rulers, builders. Their footprints marked riverbeds now turned to fossil. Their tools, too heavy for modern hands, lie buried beneath forgotten ruins. It was a world alive with wonder and fear, where humanity lived in the shadow of giants. Ancient quarries still bear the scars of their labor. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons, lifted and placed with precision modern engineers struggle to explain. Who moved the stones of Baalbek, the monoliths of Giza, or the towering gates of Sacsayhuaman? Legends say the giants built them, shaping stone as easily as clay. Their architecture was not decorative, it was functional, built for beings who stood 2 or 3 times a man's height. Even the tools unearthed from these sites tell the same story. Hammers the size of torsos, axes too heavy for a team of men. Were these symbols, ceremonial props, or remnants of a race whose strength matched their myth? Every artifact whispers the same defiance. We were not the first to master the earth. And yet, as centuries passed, these towering beings faded. Whether by catastrophe, divine judgment, or the slow erosion of time, no one knows. The ruins remain as ghostly reminders, monuments built by hands too large to belong to ordinary men. If these stories hold even a fragment of truth, then humanity's rise was not the beginning. It was the inheritance of a fallen world, a world of thunder and stone where giants once walked among men, and men could only look up in awe. Across continents, the same signatures appear: colossal monuments, impossibly heavy stones, and myths that refuse to die. In Lebanon, the unfinished trilithon of Baalbek lies half-buried, each block weighing more than a modern airliner. Engineers confess that even with today's cranes, lifting them intact would border on impossible. Yet the ancients did it, effortlessly according to legend. Who were these builders, and what knowledge have we lost? Sail across the ocean to Easter Island, and the stone giants still stand, staring blankly toward the horizon. The Rapa Nui people say the statues walked into place, guided by chance, or perhaps by beings who understood forces now forgotten. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe rises from the dust, 12,000 years old and carved with inhuman precision. Every site echoes the same question: who were they building for? The myths are clear. The Bible speaks of the Rephaim and Anakim, the Greeks of Titans, the Norse of Jotnar, all describing beings of immense size and wisdom who vanished after great cataclysms. Archaeology calls them myths, geology calls them coincidence, but the stones speak a language older than both. What if these monuments were more than temples? What if they were memories, warnings etched in rock by survivors of an age that ended in fire and flood? Every megalith, every statue, every buried city might be a message from a species that saw its own extinction coming. And perhaps that's the reason they endure, not just as relics but as echoes of a truth humanity isn't ready to face. For when we stand before these silent stones, we are not just tourists of the past. We are witnesses, staring into the architecture of a forgotten race that once looked down upon us and left behind their shadows in stone. In the modern age, censorship doesn't always come from governments. It comes wrapped in the language of peer review and scientific consensus. It is a quiet, bureaucratic silencing performed not with bans or bonfires, but with rejection letters and revoked grants. For decades, researchers who dared to question accepted timelines or mention anomalous skeletons have found themselves exiled from academia. Their papers are labeled methodologically unsound, their data inconclusive, their reputations quietly dismantled. The message is clear. Curiosity is allowed only within the walls built by consensus. Take the case of Dr. Thomas Lee, a Canadian archaeologist whose 1960s excavation at Shegianda uncovered human artifacts buried in glacial deposits, suggesting humans in North America far earlier than textbooks allowed. Instead of celebration, he was ostracized. The museum closed his exhibit, funding vanished, and the site was reburied. His crime was evidence that didn't fit the story. Others, from geneticists to anthropologists, faced similar fates when publishing research hinting at hybrid species or unexplainable remains. Their findings were buried not by data, but by design. The peer review process, once meant to uphold integrity, has become a filter that strains out anything too unconventional. Journals reject controversial results before they're even seen. Universities warn students to avoid fringe subjects. Science, once a frontier of ideas, now resembles a gated community, where only the comfortable truths are welcome. This is how knowledge is controlled. Not through open suppression, but through invisible pressure. 1,000 small denials build a single narrative, and anything outside it is quietly erased. The irony is almost poetic. The very system created to protect truth has become its greatest barrier. History's heretics were burned for defying the church. Today's are buried under bureaucracy. And somewhere between those two flames lies the same fear: that the truth, if seen, would change everything. Somewhere in the basements of the world's most trusted institutions, the truth may still exist. Not destroyed, merely hidden. Whistleblowers and rogue archivists have long whispered about sealed rooms beneath museums filled with crates that will never see daylight again. Inside them, they claim, lie the bones, skulls, and relics that contradict the story humanity has chosen to tell. In 2012, a Freedom of Information request was filed with the Smithsonian demanding records of any unusually large human skeletal remains in their possession. The official reply: no records found. Yet within the same archives, early 1900s field reports reference specimens exceeding standard human size. How does an institution lose its own paperwork? Similar requests to other museums in London, Paris, and Cairo yielded identical denials, or curious statements that the records cannot be located. Private collectors tell their own stories. Artifacts sold in secret auctions mislabeled as animal bone. Photographs of towering skeletons surface briefly online before vanishing under copyright takedowns. Even the Vatican, rumored to hold its own hidden archaeological collection, has remained uncharacteristically silent when questioned about pre-Adamic remains. One former museum technician described restricted collections, shelves sealed under special access codes, their contents known only to a handful of curators. Another spoke of bones shipped overseas for reclassification, never to return. Each testimony adds another piece to a chilling puzzle. The evidence may not be gone, merely quarantined from public sight. If these remains truly exist, their secrecy raises a deeper question. Who decides what humanity is allowed to know about its own past? Perhaps the cover-up isn't about bones at all, but about power. The power to shape memory, to dictate reality, to keep the past in chains. Because whoever controls history doesn't just own the story of yesterday. They own the truth of who we are today. What if the legends were never legends at all? What if beneath the polished timeline of human evolution lies a forgotten branch, a species erased not by extinction but by choice? The implications are staggering. If the giants were real, then history as we know it is a half-told story, edited to fit the limits of our comfort. They would not merely be larger humans, they would represent something deeper. A hybrid link between the divine and the mortal, a fusion of heaven's ambition and earth's rebellion. Ancient texts from every culture speak of them with awe and warning. beings born of gods and men punished by flood, remembered as monsters yet revered as kings. If even fragments of those accounts are factual, it means that human civilization began not in ignorance, but in the shadow of advanced, powerful predecessors. Evolution and faith would no longer stand opposed. They would be two pages of the same forbidden book. Imagine what their existence would imply, that divine intervention may not be myth but memory, that creation was not a single act, but a sequence of experiments. Our species then might be the surviving echo of a world that once mixed heaven's fire with the dust of earth. It would explain our obsession with gods, our inherited longing for the stars, and our fear of what dwells below. If the giants were real, the question shifts from how they lived to why they were erased. Were they destroyed for defying divine order, or because they revealed too much about it? Perhaps humanity wasn't meant to forget them. Perhaps we were made to. Because if their bones prove true, then everything changes, not just history, but destiny. Every truth carries a price. For centuries, humanity has chosen ignorance over upheaval, comfort over confrontation. The mystery of the giants is no longer about bones in the ground. It's about the fear within us. We sense, perhaps instinctively, that some truths are too large for the world we've built. To admit their reality would tear open the fabric of everything we think we know. Science, faith, history, even identity. Those who searched too deeply paid dearly. Careers shattered, reputations erased, discoveries buried. Yet the suppression was never absolute. It only drove the truth underground, where it continues to pulse like a heartbeat beneath the surface of collective memory. The deeper fear isn't that giants once lived. It's that we might still be living under their shadow, inheriting their secrets, their arrogance, their silence. Humanity's greatest paradox is its hunger for truth and its terror of it. We want to know, but only if the answer confirms our place at the top. The giants challenge that illusion. They remind us that we are not the first to rise, and may not be the last to fall. Maybe that's why the bones remain hidden, why the stories are ridiculed, why the evidence keeps vanishing. Because the greatest danger isn't in what the giants reveal about them, but what they reveal about us. In the end, perhaps the real giant was never flesh and bone, but our own denial, towering, immovable, casting its long shadow across every generation that dares to dig too deep. And somewhere buried in that silence waits the truth, ancient, patient, and far larger than we're ready to see. History does not always erase its secrets. Sometimes it simply buries them under noise. The truth rarely disappears. It just grows quiet, waiting for those willing to listen. The story of the giants is less about the bones themselves and more about what they represent. The fragility of knowledge, the ease with which we choose forgetfulness over wonder. Every century builds new monuments to certainty, and every generation believes it has finally uncovered the whole truth. Yet the earth beneath us tells another story, one of repetition, concealment, and rediscovery. Perhaps the bones of the giants were never meant to prove anything. Perhaps they were mirrors, forcing us to confront the arrogance of believing that all mysteries have been solved. The silence that surrounds their legend isn't empty. It hums with unanswered questions, with the faint echo of footsteps that once shook the world. Look closely and you'll see their shadow everywhere. In myths disguised as bedtime stories, in cathedrals whose columns mimic colossal limbs, in the awe we feel when we stand before ancient stone. Maybe the evidence has always been in plain sight, disguised by time, disbelief, and our own unwillingness to see. The world keeps its secrets well, but silence has its own language. It speaks through what is missing, A crate without a label, a page torn from a journal, a photograph with no caption. And for those who learn to listen, that silence tells a story louder than any discovery. That truth cannot be erased, only postponed. The earth remembers, and so should we. The desert wind moves softly over an open trench, a whisper from a world long gone. A single archaeologist kneels in the dust, brush in hand, tracing the curve of something immense buried beneath centuries of forgetting. The sun dips lower, turning the sand gold as his fingers reveal the truth inch by inch, the smooth surface of an enormous femur, bleached by time yet unmistakably human. For a moment he says nothing. There are no cameras, no headlines, no institutions waiting to approve or deny. Only the wind and the heartbeat of the earth beneath his knees. He knows that when this discovery reaches the world, it will be dismissed, denied, or quietly taken away. And still, he brushes. Because some discoveries aren't made for recognition. They're made for remembrance. The bones before him are more than relics. They are testimony. Proof that truth endures even when buried under centuries of silence. As night falls, the archaeologist covers the bones again, not to hide them, but to protect them. The earth reclaims what it once revealed, sealing the secret once more beneath its ancient skin. He stands, dust clinging to his hands, and looks to the horizon as stars begin to wake. The same stars that once looked down on those who built monuments of stone and memory. And as the wind carries the last echo of his discovery across the barren land, a thought rises like a whisper from the deep. Maybe the giants were never the monsters. Maybe the real monster is the silence that, buried them.